us something about your experience with Dalai Lama. Sorry, His Holiness. Yes? Correct. So Tenzin always uses His Holiness. And I found that strange. Well.
So anyway, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me here tonight to talk to you. I hope I have something that is of benefit to you, but if it's not, then you can just put it in the dustbin and it'll march on.
Thank you for being here.
My experiences with the Dalai Lama, well, it's a bit of a funny story. When I wanted to be a Buddhist monk, I was living in Auckland at a Tibetan Buddhist temple, and I asked my teacher at that time if he would ordain me, and he said no. Give me ordained vows, make me into a monk, and he more or less said no, wait and do it with the Dalai Lama. So the Dalai Lama was coming quite soon. I mean, the next year he came on one of his visits to New Zealand, and he was asked to consecrate the temple, our temple, which had just been very recently bought and set up. So when he arrived, I was part of the committee that brought the Dalai Lama into Auckland, and when he arrived they appointed me to be his driver. So I drove him from the airport, and I was terribly nervous because for Tibetan Buddhists, His Holiness Dalai Lama is, way up there. He's like a king or an emperor, whatever you want to call. And so I was a bit nervous, and as we were driving from the airport, he started asking me about the car, and I had no idea. So I don't know. But anyway, then as we went along, we went to one place, to another Buddhist temple where he gave a talk or something. Then on the way to Trashi Gomang, which is our Buddhist temple, I missed the turn off to the Buddhist temple. So there was the kind of guy who was in charge of all the goings on. He made me stop the car, and he leapt out of the car, and he directed all the traffic so that I could turn round into the right. This Tibetan man standing in the middle of this crossroads directing the traffic so we could go down that way. Anyway, so when we got to Trashi Gomang, I asked His Holiness if he would ordain me, and he said no, he didn't have time while he was in New Zealand and Australia, but I had to go to India the next year. This was 1996, so in 1997, I had to go to, he said, come to India next year and I'll ordain you there. Every March he ordains people every year in March. So after that he gave a big initiation. After being in New Zealand, he gave a big initiation in Australia that I went to. And there were 3,000 people in this hall, and at one time he said, I'm going to give you all vows. There's 5 precepts in Buddhism: not to kill, not to steal, not to have sexual misconduct, not to lie, and not to have take drugs or alcohol or anything like that. So lots of Buddhists take these 5 precepts as a daily thing, or sometimes for life. So he said, I'm going to give to this whole hall of 3,000 people, I'm going to give you the 5 precepts today. And is that person from New Zealand here? So before I could sort of say, yeah, and I was right at the back of the hall, so he didn't really notice. He said, okay, well, if you're here, then you don't take sexual misconduct, you take, what's the word, celibacy. You be celibate from now on. So I had to take celibacy vow for them. But then I went to India the next year to Dharamsala for the ordination ceremony. And when we were in the ordination ceremony, he said, is that person from New Zealand here? So I said, yeah. And he said, oh, very good, very good. And then we go up to have your robes blessed and so on. And when I went up, he said, this was a novice vow ordination. He said, are you taking full ordination tomorrow? Because he gave full ordination next day. I said, no. I hadn't planned to. And he said, well, you have to come back next year then. So that just meant I had to go back next year and become a fully ordained monk. And that's kind of my experience with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, which is very nice. I mean, if you know His Holiness, it's a very nice connection to have made. But I'm no longer a monk, so...
But you took his, I was going to say Christian name, that's not quite appropriate, is it? You took his...
Oh, His Holiness, whenever a senior monk ordains others, you always take his first name. You always take the first name of the ordaining monk. So all the monks that are called Tenzin would have been ordained by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Yeah, always everything is Tenzin with His Holiness. So if you come across any Buddhist monks from the Tibetan tradition called Tenzin, particularly from the Gelugpa tradition, you can assume that he or she has been ordained by His Holiness. So that's my kind of history with His Holiness. But anyway, I wasn't going to talk about that this evening. I was planning to talk about that. Marshall asked me to talk about something, and I was associated with the Hamilton Temple out in Silverdale, and about a week ago, we did a meditation on what we called friend, enemy, stranger. And Marshall said that would be a good topic to talk about at the convention. So I'm going to say something about equanimity, developing the mind of equanimity, which in other words is freeing oneself from the minds of classifying people or other beings as friend, enemy, stranger. So the reason why we want to be free of the mind of friend, enemy, stranger can be found in just about every religion. For instance, Jesus Christ said, love thy neighbor as thyself. Now, when I was a kid, I was brought up as a Christian. When I was a kid, then I thought neighbor meant the guy living next door. Do you live like the guy next door as yourself? But as I've grown older, I've come to realize that neighbor doesn't mean that. Neighbor means the person that's right next to you at any particular time. So when I'm sitting next to John, he's my neighbor. When I'm sitting next to Marshall, he's my neighbor, and so on. So what Jesus was saying was, from my understanding, was that whoever's in your sphere of influence, you love them as much as you love yourself. And so what he was really saying was love everybody. Love everybody that you come across as you love yourself. This is my understanding. I haven't had vast teachings on this particular phrase, but this is what I've come to understand. What this instruction meant. And then, of course, some of us in the West, we don't like ourselves very much. So the instruction, love thy neighbour as thyself, does not make much sense.
Not very demanding.
Not very demanding. But I think anybody that is on a spiritual journey, that has a robust and vital spiritual life, must necessarily love themselves. I don't think that anybody who's on a spiritual journey can dislike themselves. It's part of the spiritual journey that you learn to love yourself. And then I think Jesus' instruction was for a healthy person, a person who has a healthy attitude towards themselves, to love others in the same way. Again, this is my interpretation. I don't know. The Christians might have a different idea, but this is my interpretation. Then, So what he's really talking about is unconditional love, right? Unconditional love for all beings, for everybody that you come across. Then in Buddhism, we have a discourse that the Theravadan tradition likes to chant, likes to recite, just about every time they get together or any functional event. They recite what they call the Karenia Metta Sutra, which is the sutra on loving kindness. And part of it goes like this. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none, through anger or ill will, wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects her life with her life, her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will, whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. And so this is again this very similar instruction that wherever you go, whoever you come across, love that person as much as you can, as much as with this unconditional love. And also, I don't know very much about Islam. I don't know the Quran. I haven't read the Quran or studied it in any way. But I do have read some of Rumi's poetry, and Rumi said, he's one of the great, for anybody who doesn't know, I'm sure you all know who Rumi is, one of the great Sufi mystic poets. He said, nobody talks to himself with a loud voice. Since we are all one, let us call out to each other from our hearts, without mouths or lips. Let us give up conversation made with our tongues and vibrate with our hearts. So again, we come across the same sort of thing, that regarding everybody as yourself, and communicating to all beings with your heart, rather than seeing some as friends, some as enemies, and some as strangers. I've never heard of a real spiritual master, any real spiritual master, preach or teach division and separateness and apartheid. I don't think the previous prime ministers of South Africa, I come from South Africa originally, were real spiritual masters, although they probably went to church every Sunday and said prayers every day. But I think all the spiritual masters that I've ever read or have ever read of all have the same kind of message, that at the base of everything is unconditional love. So this is whatever spiritual path we follow. This is kind of a real direction for us, for a real instruction for us to follow, to develop this unconditional love for all beings. But if we look at our lives, then what do we see? Do we see that we have developed unconditional love for all beings? Most of us, I think, will have to admit that we have friends and we have enemies and we have strangers. I don't mean, when I say enemies, I don't mean somebody that you hate with a passion and want to stab in the midriff with a lightsaber or anything like that. But there are people that we dislike, that when we think about them, the mind goes, oh, no. Or if you see them walking down the street, you quietly walk to the other side of the street and pretend that you're going into a shop that you never intended to go into, things like that. I think we all have that kind of thing in our lives. We all, unless we really highly developed people, we regard some people as our friends, some people as our enemy, or somebody that we dislike or even despise, and then other people are strangers. And if you think of your attitude towards strangers, what kind of mind views strangers? It's a mind. It's a kind of mind of ignorance. It's a mind that doesn't want to know about the other person very much. Just regards the other person as some kind of passing phenomena, and hasn't got much concern for them at all. So it's a kind of ignorance, a kind of indifference and ignorance. So we have these three minds. The friend, we tend, when we have friends, we tend to get attached to them. We tend to, cling on and like to be with them. And when we're not with them, then we tend to be a little bit sad that we're not with our friends. And with these people that we don't like so much, as I said before, the mind gets uncomfortable whenever we think about them or see them. And then strangers, the mind has this indifference. How many of us can see a beggar in the street and have the same love for that beggar in the street as we do for our own children? How many of us regard our workmates, for instance, with the same unbiased love? All our workmates, can we see them all in the same way? That we all have the same love for all of them. I think, and I remember in my days of working when I was much younger, there was always tensions, between people, people criticizing others, gossiping about others, and so on. And of course, some were friends with others, and so on. But there was always, it was never equanimous. It was never even. So, how easy is it to follow this instruction of the great masters, Jesus, Buddha, Rumi, and all the other great masters that say we should love each other without any bias at all? I think very difficult. If you look into your own mind, you think, how can I do this? It's very difficult indeed. But we have to, if we want to be on the spiritual path, we kind of have to do this work. We have to change our mind. We have to do whatever we can to change the mind from the friend, enemy, stranger, so that we can develop this unconditional love for all beings. Just because we've heard about friend, enemy, and we've heard that we should love everybody. It's not easy to tear out all our conditioning, all our habitual tendencies, and to throw them away and suddenly to love everybody. I mean, it's kind of totally impractical. It's not going to happen. So we have to work at it bit by bit. We have to work at it slowly, overcoming our prejudices and our biases and our conditioning, so that we can eventually develop that same attitude that Jesus and Buddha and Rumi and all the others have had. So, from a Buddhist point of view, all the problems that we encounter come from within. There are no problems outside. Everything comes from within. All the problems come from the mind and the way that the mind has been conditioned, and the habitual tendency, our habitual tendencies. So if we look, but from a Buddhist point of view also, the mind is not made up of these habitual tendencies. These are just these tendencies, and all this conditioning is merely like overlay. It is not in the nature of the mind. It is not in the nature of consciousness to be like this. It is something that we've learned and that we follow through our conditioning. It's not the nature of the mind to be picky about other beings. From a Buddhist point of view, the mind, the consciousness is, from a Buddhist point of view, everything is impermanent. Everything is impermanent and changeable. Everything. There's nothing that is there's one or two things that are permanent, but the consciousness is not one of them. Most things, almost all things, are impermanent and so are changeable. and the mind can be changed. So from a Buddhist point of view, there is nothing stopping us from changing. If we want to change our mind, there's nothing stopping us from changing our habitual tendencies and our conditioning and so on. It's not in the nature of the mind. The mind is not a permanent thing. The consciousness is not a permanent thing. And so we can change it if we really want to. So this gives us the opportunity to look into our consciousness, look into our inner world, and what we see there, if we find something we want to change, we can do so. So if we want to change the attitude of friend, enemy, stranger, then we can certainly do it. It might take a long time because we're very familiar with this grasping at friend, enemy, stranger. We're very familiar with doing this. So it's not easy to change our habit pattern. But if we keep on changing, training, and changing, eventually we can also become Jesus, Buddha, Rumi, anybody that we wish, that we admire. We can become like that being. So if we look at friend, enemy, stranger, now, I say to you that friend, enemy, stranger is not helpful. But is that true or not? What we need to do is to look into our own mind and see whether the friend, enemy, stranger attitude is helpful to us or not. If you have a close friend, what does that close friend, what does that attitude of having a close friend do to your mind? So from a Buddhist point of view, the best kind of type of consciousness or mind that we need to be at peace, to be completely at peace, and not to undergo suffering of any sort, is the mind that is at peace and quiet and calm and serene under all sorts of circumstances. So if that is the mind that we're looking for, which is from a Buddhist point, that's what the Buddha's mind is like, serene under all circumstances. In other words, the Buddha is never disturbed by any circumstances, even if he or her finds themselves in the middle of a great war or a great conflagration. Their minds stay perfectly calm and serene and undisturbed. And so imagine what that must be like, that if whatever comes up, excuse me, whatever comes up, you're not disturbed. You're not overwhelmed by anything, any outside circumstances. And you can deal with whatever circumstances arise. You can deal with this calm, wise mind. What must that be like? Wouldn't that be pretty amazing? From a Buddhist point of view, that would be pretty amazing. So if you have that as that kind of consciousness as your goal, then if you look at friend, enemy, stranger, you can see that when you have a close friend that you sort of clinging to, that you're attached to, and you're clinging to, and this could be your partner, or it could be anybody that's close to you. If you look at the effect on your mind, you'll see that it disturbs the mind. The mind wants to be with that person, and when you're not with that person, the mind feels sad or uncomfortable and longing for that person. So this is a disturbance to the mind. It's a disturbance to your consciousness. Similarly, when you look at an enemy, somebody you dislike, you can immediately see how that disturbs the mind. Immediately something uncomfortable happens. Something uncomfortable occurs. It's immediately a disturbance. It's like the sea being flat, and then suddenly you get some kind of wind energy that makes the sea disturbed. And similarly, when you think about strangers, this mind of dullness, this mind of indifference to strangers, is another kind of disturbance. It's a kind of dullness of mind, which in Buddhism we call dullness of mind, and this indifference. It's not vibrant and interested and involved. It's kind of just dulled out. So all of these, if we look at the way that this attitude that we've been conditioned to, of having some beings as friends, some beings as enemies, and other beings as strangers, if we look, we can see that actually this just disturbs the mind. It's a disturbance to the mind. It doesn't encourage the mind of clear, vibrant wisdom. It also does not encourage the mind of universal loving kindness and compassion. As long as we have some bias in our mind, we can forget about unconditional love for all beings, like the masters tell us, instruct us to have. So this bias, this friend, enemy, stranger, in a worldly kind of way is acceptable and encouraged. But if we're on a spiritual journey, it's the kind of mind that is actually very harmful. It doesn't help. And you can see this if you take it to an extreme, if you're in a country and you regard the neighbor country as your enemy, then there's it can lead to a lot of pain, it can lead to war and so on. And you think about the world wars. What was the thinking behind the world wars? It was enemy. They're my enemy and I have to go out and kill them. No matter what political or social stories you make up about it, what you're doing is encouraging your mind to be hateful to others. And then, if you want the Americans to come in and help you with the war, then they become your allies, they become your friends. And so then they come in and they do all sorts of things like bomb the Japanese. So this mind of friend, enemy, stranger leads to all sorts of very unhappy and nasty kind of results. So from a spiritual point of view, this is a mind that we have to, these attitudes of friend, enemy, stranger is something that we have to free ourselves from, get rid of. But as I said before, if you try to develop unconditional love immediately, it's almost impossible. There's too much conditioning. There's too much habitual tendency to be able to just tear this out of your mind, and automatically the mind becomes friend, enemy, stranger. Automatically it goes there. So we have to train it over a long period of time, and we can't just follow the instruction. Jesus said, "Love your neighbor," and your neighbor chucks rubbish over your fence into your yard. It's not easy to say, "Oh, I love you very much. Thank you very much." In fact, you much rather, have a very different type of mindset towards your neighbor. So, over a period of time, we have to start with. And from a Buddhist point of view, this is one of our trainings, is that you start with developing equanimity first of all. You don't try to love everybody. You try to develop a mind that is equanimous with everybody. So you just view everybody in the same kind of warm-hearted way, but not, it's not suddenly changing your habit patterns into something that's what Jesus or Buddha said, or something like that.
Not attached to everybody.
Yeah, not attached to some and averse to others and so on. So immeasurable equanimity is defined as an impartial and unbiased goodwill for all others without attachment, hatred or indifference. So it's just this warm-hearted attitude that you view everybody, even the person you walk past you on the street, you view them with this kind of warm-heartedness. Often when people walk past us on the street, we have some judgmental mind that occurs. Oh, they're so dirty. How can, stay away from me. You know, this kind of attitude, or if some posh person comes by, ooh, very nice. You know, whatever attitude you have towards them, and it's this biased mind makes you do these things. So we tried to, first of all, develop what we call immeasurable equanimity. Immeasurable because the object of the equanimity is all beings. It doesn't matter, all beings. So if you maybe in Buddhism we'll say even cockroaches, you know, or blue bottle flies, or snakes, or so you try to develop an equanimity to all of them. But if that's a bit too much, then you can think of all human beings. Try to develop an equanimity towards all human beings. So this is what we start off with. Before we start off with the meditations on loving kindness, universal loving kindness and compassion, and so on. And the Tibetans have a very beautiful meditation called Tonglen, in which you take on others' suffering and give out happiness, which is kind of the peak of this process. But this is the first kind of step, developing this equanimity. Before we can go onto those kind of meditations and so on, we develop immeasurable equanimity. So how do you develop immeasurable equanimity? So I'm going to just go through a few methods of developing immeasurable equanimity. And as you listen, one of them might spring out to you, yes, that really resonates with me. So if that resonates with you, just take that away. You don't have to follow all the methods that I'm going to talk about. But if one resonates with you, then take that away and think about it and try to use it. It'll be very helpful in eliminating the mind of friend, enemy, stranger. So first of all, the first one is called remembering equality. So if I asked you, what do you all want? What every single action that you do has an aim, has a purpose. And what is that purpose? There's a two-pronged purpose. What is the purpose of every action that you do?
Avoid pain and gain happiness, pleasure, fulfillment.
That's right. So every single action we do is for the purpose of avoiding some kind of suffering or gaining some kind of happiness. So that's common with all of us. I mean, there's not one person here. Put up your hand if you want suffering and you don't want happiness. You lie, you lie, you lie. I don't believe you for an instant. All of us want happiness. I mean, you could say, well, you know, some people go to dominatrixes and they get themselves beaten and all that sort of thing. But they regard that as some kind of happiness as well, you know. We might think, what? What the heck, man? But they regard it, you know, they go away and they think, oh, that was a nice session.
Have you got any phone numbers?
See me afterwards. If you think about it, every single action we do is in search of happiness and to be free of pain. Even great sportsmen who go through enormous amounts of pain in their training and that sort of thing. Why are they doing it? Because if they become the top sportsman of theirs, the top sportsman, if they can beat the other fella, then they get great happiness out of it. So we might go through a lot of pain, but the end game, the end result that we're looking for is happiness. Even though we experience some pain, we're doing that because we feel it'll bring us some happiness. So if you think of others in those terms, that everybody's the same, everybody wants happiness and nobody wants suffering, there's not one person, there's not one being that is different from myself in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering, then immediately the mind creates a some kind of equanimity between everybody. The differences between us get blurred. Of course, we don't all want the same happiness. Some people like watching movies for happiness. Some people, want to visit dominatrixes for happiness. Some people, drive their cars for happiness. There are all sorts of things. Some people eat a lot for happiness, whatever. But even though all the happinesses are different, they all have the same goal. We all want happiness, and we don't want suffering. So if you can recognize that everybody in this room, everybody in this town, everybody in this world wants happiness and doesn't want suffering, then you can start developing some measure of equanimity in the mind. Also, everybody, from a Buddhist point of view, everybody can become a Buddha. Or if you want another Eastern religion, everybody can unite with God. Everybody can become in harmony with God. There's not one single person on this whole earth that cannot go into union with God, or from a Buddhist point of view, can become enlightened. So we all have that nature. That nature, every single one of us has that nature. From a Buddhist point of view, even all the animals all have that nature as well. We can all become enlightened. So again, we have this in common, that we all have the ability to evolve to the greatest that we can possibly be, which is from a Buddhist point of view, is a Buddha, and from other religions' point of view, union with God, or whatever, however you want to describe it, we all have that within us. And another thing that we all have is that the conditioning, our conditioning, the negative things that we do is just conditioning. It's not the nature. It's not our innate nature. Even if you get somebody that's very evil, that does really bad things, from a Buddhist point of view, that is not their real nature. They're doing that because of conditioning and causes and conditions that have brought them into that state, and they don't know how to get out of it. Ajahn Brahm and others that work in the prisons, other Buddhist monks that work in the prisons, they go to, go into teach meditation and so on in the prisons. And often they say that the prisoners say to them that they didn't realize that they had an option. In other words, they acted in certain ways. If they were brought up to be very aggressive and to solve all problems through aggression, that's how they think that problems are solved. And lots of them don't realize that they have other options. So they just follow their conditioning, the way their mind's been conditioned. And so then they get into trouble, they go to jail. And of course in jail everything is aggressive, so it's all just reinforced. So all these negative states, from a Buddhist point of view, all the negative states are they're not part of you. They're not part of the ultimate mind. They're just adventitious, and they can be changed. They can be transformed into something that is much more beneficial. So again, we all have that in common, that we can evolve, that we can become great evolved beings, free of all negativity and suffering and all the rest of it that cause our problems. We all have that Buddha nature within us. And the nature of consciousness, from a Buddhist point of view, is clear and knowing. It is not stained by any habitual pattern at all. The habitual patterns are merely like, in Buddhism they talk about, it's like a mirror. And the mirror has got lots of dirt on it, so it can't reflect. But you can clear the dirt off. And the mirror is like the mind, like the consciousness, the ultimate consciousness. But you can clear, you can wash the mirror, and you can clear all the dirt off it, and then the mirror becomes vibrant and reflects everything. So in a similar way, your ultimate consciousness is just covered by all the conditioning, and habitual patterns and the imprints that are on it. But it's not that's not part of the mind. That's not part of you. Your personality is not part of you. It is just something that's over the top of the ultimate nature. And so it can be cleared out. And that is true for all of us. And so, if I look at all of you, and I see you as potentially Buddhas or potentially God, people of God, at God's side, if you like, and completely evolved, then I have my mind is much less likely to go, you did this to me, and I'm really cross with you, and I hate you, and I don't want to see you, and the kind of petty things that we base our friend, enemy, stranger on. If we can see that every one of us has this ultimate pure nature, then it's again we have an opportunity to develop an equanimous mind rather than give in to the friend, enemy, stranger training or conditioning that we've had. Do you follow what I'm saying? So that's remembering equality, remembering the things that make us common, that are common to all of us. That we all want happiness, we don't want suffering. We all have this ignorance that's overlaying our Buddha nature, our ultimate nature, and but those stains are adventitious. They can be cleared away. They can be transformed. They can be transformed into something much more beneficial. So it's for all of us. There's not one exception. So if we look at people like that, or other beings like that, then we can develop this mind. The more we can train our minds to look at beings like that, the less we're involved with little petty arguments that make friend, enemy, stranger, and the more open we can become. And that, in its own way, transforms the mind, transforms our consciousness, it frees us from the stains and the habitual patterns. Then another way that you can develop equanimity is to remember impermanence. Now, if you think about your relationships up to now, how many of them have stayed the same? They haven't, right? None of your relationships have stayed the same. If you fall in love, you think, oh, this is so wonderful. We're going to be like this forever and ever and ever. Lie. Yeah, we've all done that. Each one of us has done that. You know, you see it as if it's going to be forever and ever. But actually, 10 years down the track, it's changed into something completely different. And it may, just as much in love you were then, now you're in hatred. It is possible. I'm not saying it happens all the time, but it is possible. And we've known of relationships like that. And the movies are full of them, that's what makes a movie, this kind of thing. So anyway, remembering that relationships change, that relationships are not something that stay the same all the time. They change all the time. And, I never got married because I could never promise somebody that I was going to live with them for the rest of my life. It seemed like impossible. I don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. Never mind for the rest of my life. So it never seemed feasible for me to. But anyway.
But you did become a monk. Now that was a commitment for life.
Obviously not.
When you prove me wrong again.
And see, I said I was going to be a monk for life, but look at me now. Relationships change.
Yeah.
Everything is impermanent. Yeah. It doesn't stay the same. Yeah, anyway, so the relationships change, and today's friend can be tomorrow's enemy. Today's enemy could be the next day can be your friend, or could be a stranger. I mean, if you think about all the relationships you've had, if you think about the friends that you had when you were much younger, how many of them are still your friends? As far as I'm concerned, none of them. None of them. They've all gone their ways. And the friends I have today, I can't say that they'll be my friends in even 2 years' time, or even 1 year's time.
Sorry,
You know?
I'm not sure.
But if you have an idea that relationships change, if you know that relationships change, then you don't cling on to them. You don't cling on that this is my friend for the rest of eternity or something like that. You enjoy the relationship while it happens, but when it finishes, there's no disturbance to the mind. It's time to part, see you later, bye. Yeah, and the labels we give to people change as well. Some people we call close friends, then they become a little bit more distant. We still see them as friends, but they're not close friends. So all these things, people we label as enemy, they do something nice for us, and then they're no longer our enemy, and so on. So all these things all these labels we put on people, they're not permanent. They change. As the relationship changes, so the labels also change. And if we keep on, if we stick the label on and then believe the label is there for, forever until I die or whatever, then of course it becomes a problem. Again, if we see that everything is in the nature of impermanence, then we allow things to go. We let things go, and we allow things to work in their own way, rather than try to make them into some kind of permanent, sticky kind of thing that we feel we have to be loyal to. Because nothing, from a Buddhist point of view, nothing, as I said before, nothing is permanent. One or two things have a permanent nature, but they're not anything that we need to concern ourselves with in our experience. So the amount of closeness or distance that we have with people are definitely going to change over time. And so recognizing this, again, we can give up this idea of clinging on to friend, enemy, stranger, and develop a much more equanimous attitude. This person, I like this person, we get on very well together, but I know that in 5 or in a little while, this relationship will change. This person might go to another country and never see them again, and whatever, it's definitely going to change. Whatever happens, it's definitely going to change. So you have that kind of attitude, then the mind is able to let go and become more expansive, more open, and not cling so much onto friend, enemy, stranger. So that's remembering impermanence. Then remembering the benefits that in Buddhism it says that the most valuable person in your life is your enemy. And why is that? Because your enemy shows you what your mind is up to. It very clearly shows you up to what your mind is up to. A friend is not likely to show you where your prejudices and biases are, because the friend is always saying, yeah, you're such a nice guy, you're such a nice person, I love you, I like you so much, and you feel all, and then your mind doesn't. But if your enemy says to you, you're such a BBB, and I don't like you, and I'm going to do something to harm you, then the mind becomes really alert and awake. And, and if you look into your own mind, you can see where your own hatred and your own aversion arises. And there you can do a lot of work. You can do a lot of transformation at that time. So these people, these friend, enemy, stranger, you can regard as a benefit in that you can use your own mind, you can use them when they arise to transform your own mind. There was a great teacher by the name of Atisha, and he was an Indian master, and he was invited to go to Tibet and teach in Tibet. So he went to Tibet, and he took with him a cook that was always criticizing him, always telling him what he was doing wrong. So the Tibetan said to him, "Why do you have this cantankerous, grumpy old cook with you?" And he said, "Oh, he's very good. He teaches me patience. He teaches me how to look into my mind and to develop patience." And he thought that, the Tibetans had added this reputation for being kind and good and patient and all the rest of it. Eventually he sent the cook back to India because he said the Tibetans function just as well as the cook.
Well, we've got tremendous opportunity here then.
Absolutely. So seeing how friend, enemy, stranger, when it arises in your mind, can teach you about your own prejudices and your own biases and how you can transform them into something that's much more beneficial for you. So then you can start using friend, enemy, stranger as something that you can use, that you welcome because you can transform it. You can transform and understand your mind better. You can understand what's going on inside you better and transform it into something much more beneficial for you. So that's remembering the benefit that you can get from friend, enemy, stranger. And then finally, remembering projection. This means that if I call Marshall my friend, then my mind tends to think Marshall is a friend from his own side. That means that Marshall himself is defined as a friend. That friend and Marshall go together in some way. Do you understand? But actually, if John doesn't like Marshall, then it proves that Marshall doesn't have that definition of friend. Because if Marshall had that definition of friend, he would be a friend to John as well. He'd be a friend to everybody. If Marshall was a real friend, you couldn't escape him being your friend because it's coming from him. But the label friend is coming from me. It's got nothing to do with Marshall. I see Marshall as some kind of, he's nice to me, so I label him friend.
I feel this is true. I think it's from me.
You'd like it to be from you.
Yes, that's right.
I'm sure you have people that don't like you.
One very serious one, yes. I struggle with it. Yes.
Well, there you go. That proves my point. You just need one person not to like you, and it shows that you are not defined as friend.
I'm going home now. I can get insulted with my wife. I don't have to come here.
I'm not insulting you. I'm just pointing out the truth. That friend, enemy, stranger is something your mind makes up. There's no friend, enemy, stranger out there. There's no such thing there. Of course, I don't know you very well. I don't know any of you very well. But that doesn't make you stranger. Doesn't make you a stranger. It doesn't define you as a stranger. It's only my conception that you're a stranger. And if you do something nice for me, there's a very good chance you'll become my friend. And if you do something nasty to me, there's a very good chance you'll become my enemy. It's like that. That we judge friend, enemy, and stranger through projections. There's no such thing as friend, enemy, stranger. It's only our own projection. If there was real friend, enemy, and stranger, then those people would be really friend, enemy, stranger to everybody.
But some people are dangerous to you, aren't they? Compared to others.
Yes, but they're not in themselves enemy to you. They're only enemy if you label them enemy. Again, if you label this person is useful to me because he allows me, or he or she allows me to see what's arising in my mind when they come towards me, and I can use that to develop loving kindness or unconditional love or equanimity or whatever you want to do, then that person's not your enemy. That person is your friend.
Invaluable.
Yeah, invaluable. Becomes invaluable. So it's how the mind projects. So everything that we see is a mental projection from a Buddhist point of view. Everything that we have an opinion about is just a mental projection. It's not like it's real. It's unreal. It's just a mental projection. And lots of our mental projections come from our conditioning, from our habitual patterns. And we see people and things in certain ways that they don't exist like that. They don't actually exist like that. They only exist like that through our own mental projection. And so we act out with these things, with these people and so on, through our conditioning, not through what's actually there. And friend, enemy, stranger is a very good example of this. that we project friend, enemy, and stranger onto others, and then we act out in terms of our projections, not in terms of what is there. You know, we all hate cockroaches, or most of us hate cockroaches. Why? When you were a little baby, you didn't hate cockroaches. You would probably play with them. If one came across in your playground, you'd probably poke it and do things with it, and you wouldn't be worried about it at all. Then your mother said to you, "Don't play with that, it's dirty." You know, and every time a cockroach came in, you'd see the mother going, "Psh, psh, psh, raid, 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 psh, psh, psh." And then you think, yeah, the cockroach is dirty, the cockroach is evil, nasty. So now a cockroach appears on the lectern, I go, whoa! You know? Well, what's the cockroach doing? It's just a cockroach doing what cockroaches do. It's not particularly dirty or anything. It's just my training, my conditioning has made it dirty. My projection makes it evil. To other cockroaches, the cockroach is not evil. So in this way, when we remember that when we see people in a certain light, that this is our projection. It's not, those people are not like that. Those people are not like that. Other people see them in a completely different light. And so, remembering that this is just projection, then we can start thinking, well, I shouldn't project like this, because actually it causes me a lot of problems, and it causes others a lot of problems as well. So how can I transform this projection so that it's much more beneficial to those in front of me and to myself? And then there's the work in developing equanimity. Seeing, you know, one of the things that our projection does is when somebody does something bad to us, immediately that person becomes a bad person, becomes an evil person, and everything they do from then on becomes bad. And we go to our friends and say, that person's so bad. Even when they do something nice, we say, that person's not actually doing something nice. They have some ulterior motive. Ajahn Brahm is a very famous monk in Australia. When he goes to the prisons, he says to the prisoners, "What did you do?" And they say, "Oh, I did this, you know, I stole or whatever I did." And he says, "Well, what are you?" And then they say, "Oh, I'm a criminal." And he says, "No, you're not a criminal. You did one criminal act. You did one criminal act. Think about all the nice things that you've done in your life, all the positive things you've done in your life. So now, can you define yourself as a criminal because you've done so many good things in your life, and now you've done one or two bad things, and now you're in jail, and now you're a criminal. You label yourself criminal, or people label you as criminal. But you're not a criminal. And that's what we do. You know, we label people as criminal. If you meet somebody that's just come out of jail, they say, "I just come out of jail, I assaulted my wife or my husband or whatever," and they come out of jail, then immediately the mind goes, "Oh, criminal, criminal. There's something bad about this person." See what the mind does? Immediately makes the person into, they did something that was not right, probably out of some very strong conditioning, some emotional upheaval that they could possibly regretted right afterwards. But now they're labeled as criminal, and that's what the mind does. As soon as you get one action, it labels the person as good or bad or something like that. But that person is not just one act. That person is a multitude of acts, and many of them are good acts and some of them are bad acts. So again, if you can see the mind projecting like this, then you can say, no, this person is not bad. This person has done a bad action, but they're not a bad person. That doesn't make them a bad person. And so then that gives you some space to develop equanimity and compassion and forgiveness, and slowly to develop, even eventually you can develop unconditional love for that person no matter what they did. Just like Jesus or Buddha or, you know, the other great masters. So those are some of the ways that we can change our mind to develop equanimity. Remembering equality, remembering impermanence, remembering the benefit, and remembering projection. So, from a Buddhist point of view, it's very important that before we develop loving kindness, we develop equanimity. because it's much more difficult to try to develop loving kindness from a biased mind than it is from a mind that is unbiased. It's like if you want to make a beautiful garden, you can't go and plant your flowers in a rocky, there's just a rocky piece of land there, and you go and plant your flowers. That's not going to make you a beautiful garden. You first have to take the rocks out and put the nice soil in and make everything ready for the garden. So similarly, equanimity does that for the development of loving kindness and compassion. Prepares the ground for later on developing unbounded loving kindness and compassion. So that's all I have to say tonight. Thank you very much again for inviting me. I hope I've been of some benefit.
So all we've got to do now is do it, right?
Yeah, that's always what you have to do. That's the difficult part.
Oh,
Yes,
that's
certainly.
of course, isn't it? Yes, love.
Hello. Yeah, we have this kind of joke in our household and with other friends and things about being on the spiritual path, and we joke about maybe we'll just chuck all these worldly things away and we'll go to the top of the mountain. And if we live on the top of the mountain for a period of time, the things that we're trying to do will come easier than down in the trenches. So you've been to the top of the mountain. Is it easier?
No, it's much more difficult.
You can't lie, you've been to all the
I can joke. Actually, yes, it becomes easier, but you have to be very careful about that sort of thing. Again, turning to Milarepa was very determined, and he did many bad things in his early life, and then he realized that he'd done these bad things. He killed a lot of people, and so he wanted to make reparations, and so he found a teacher, and then the teacher made him do all sorts of difficult tasks. And eventually the teacher wouldn't teach him until he'd done a lot of difficult tasks. Eventually the teacher gave him teachings and then sent him off to the mountain to go and this was the Himalayas, so it's pretty cold up there. And he meditated there and became enlightened. And then later on there was a Tibetan merchant who was quite rich, comfortable, and he heard about Milarepa. And he said, yeah, I'm going to do that. Oh, I'm going to become enlightened. So he gave away all his stuff and he went up into the mountains. And everybody said to him, don't be silly. But he didn't want to listen, so he went into the mountains. 3 weeks later he came down from the mountains and he said, all that bloomin' Milarepa did for me to make me poor. So he couldn't do anything in the mountains. He couldn't meditate. He meditated for a while and then his mind went all over the place. And unless you've done you've taken a lot of teachings or done a lot of work below the mountain, first of all, there's no point in giving everything up and going up into the mountain and trying to be a saint if you're not that stage yet. You have to do the work to get to that stage, then you can go to the mountains. So that's why many of the monks, they don't go meditating. We don't become a monk and then go meditate in the mountains. Very few monks do that. Monks that have very strong minds can do that. But most monks will go and they'll spend at least 5 years learning and acclimatizing themselves to meditation and learning how to meditate and learning what to do and taking the teachings. And many of them spend much more than that. The Tibetan monks spend 20 to 25 years before they go to meditate. They spend learning and debating and all that sort of thing. So it's not that you can just give everything up and go to the top of the mountain. That's not going to work at all. You have to prepare yourself, and then when the time is right, then you can go to the mountain and everything will be all right. It's like that. Any other questions?
Yes.
I don't know whether this is opening a can of worms or not, but you said that everything is impermanent except for a couple of things. Can you tell us what those couple of things are? Or is this another long talk?
Yes, this is a very long talk. In Mahayana Buddhism we talk about emptiness. Emptiness means that things do not have inherent existence. They don't exist from their own side. They only exist as a collection of other things. And they have no inherent existence of their own. Emptiness is permanent. But you see, as I said, it's nothing that we need to worry ourselves about at this particular stage. Because we don't, again, the monks get lots of teachings on what emptiness is and how emptiness, and there's lots and lots and lots and lots of stuff about emptiness in the monastic teachings, because it's a very profound subject. It's not something that you can easily pick up just like that. So they spend a lot of time studying it, but actually emptiness is permanent.
Kim.
I play badminton. There's 4 people on the court, and there was someone, an Indian guy, and I was playing with him, and he could see much more than I could. And instead of saying over there, or your shot, or quick, do something about it, he just said empty.
Oh, that was helpful.
And of course, you had to actually think for yourself. You had to be aware, and that was fast.
It definitely left me empty at that moment.
And of course, you could get the shot really quickly. But if you said you or any other thing,
No more, Kim, please. Any others? Yes, sir.
What if somebody is neither friend, nor enemy, nor stranger? They're just somebody that you know and you're relatively neutral towards them, and then you find out at a later date that they have been very enemy-like in the background. How do you deal with people like that when they're projecting onto you and you're relatively neutral towards them?
Well, again, you have to look at your mind when you realize that they've been antagonistic to you in some way. You look at your mind. What arises in your mind? Sorry?
Disappointment.
Okay, disappointment, or maybe dislike, or something like that. Disappointment, something like that. Then you look at why you are disappointed. Why are you disappointed? I never promised you that they were going to be faithful to you or anything like that. They never gave you any promises at all. They can act in whatever way they want.
Oh, don't worry, they do.
And they do, exactly. So you have to look in your own mind, why are you disappointed? What made you project onto them some quality that they didn't have? And so, yeah, so now you see, that's very good, because now you can look at what your habitual pattern is in that kind of situation. And you can start changing your habitual pattern. So the next time somebody comes like that along, you're much more cautious and you're much more, you take much more care that you don't put that kind of expectation on them.
Yeah, thank you.
You're not talking about me,
I haven't used any names.
Quiet, please. Order. Yes, sir.
What made you give up your...
Oh, you can't ask me that. Yes, go on.
Sorry, if it's too personal, that's all right. It's just, obviously you were working with a tradition, but I just wondered if that relationship with that tradition changed, if you decided to leave.
No, there were some physical circumstances that didn't allow me to continue, because I couldn't keep the vows very well. And I'm not the sort of person that really likes people to bow down and touch my feet and all that sort of carry on.
I was on the right track, not calling you venerable then.
There was a number of things that just, the way I look at it is that life changes. You know, just another life change. So I'm not sorry I was a monk, and I'm not overjoyed that I've stopped being a monk. It might be possible I go back to being a monk at some stage if circumstances change again. It was just a life change. This time for this particular change to happen.
Just see how, when you come to speak, you actually think, now how can I bless these people? Because I'm only going to talk to them about an hour, 3/4 an hour, whatever it is. How does one lift or help to lift from life's ocean of distress? I think the guitar puts it, doesn't it? To lift them from life's ocean of distress. And you want to do that because, if you like, it's the Buddhist Sutra. Power, isn't it? How can I enter heaven knowing you are suffering? What sort of heaven is that? You see? So, when you talk, you want to be a blessing. Now, I didn't introduce him, see? But the key thing about him is he always wants to be a blessing. That's what I say. Wonderful chap. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.